3 million voices were silenced in seconds. No warning, no mercy, just fire from the sky and a crater where hope once stood. The galaxy called it an unfortunate incident. But humanity remembered. And when the stars turned their backs, Earth answered, not with words but with 700,000 ships. This isn't just a story of war. It's the story of a memory that refused to die, and a people who rose not for revenge, but for justice. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful story. The stars above Sirius 9 shimmered like scattered jewels, quiet and distant, as if they were watching, from far away, uninterested in the small lives beneath them. The colony had grown slowly but proudly over the years, filled with families, scientists, and dreamers who had left Earth for a new beginning. It was a peaceful world, rich with red soil and twin moons that rose side by side in the sky. Children laughed in fields, researchers celebrated breakthroughs in alien agriculture, and farmers shared meals with miners and engineers under the warmth of handmade lights. No one saw the fire coming. Fleet Captain Leora Vale leaned forward in her chair aboard the patrol vessel Solaris, her eyes fixed on the screen in front of her. The transmission had arrived without warning, a garbled message from the governor of Sirius 9. There had been no emergency alert, no calls for help, just static. And then suddenly, a face. Governor Milan Ordis appeared on the screen, bathed in red emergency lights. His voice was shaky, his face covered in soot and panic. Unidentified ships in orbit, no response, massive energy surge. The feed cut out. Leora had played that message at least a dozen times, each replay leaving her colder. She knew Milan. Not well, but enough. He was not the kind of man to panic easily. He had managed the colony through food shortages, mining, accidents, and 2 harsh winters. If he was afraid, something truly terrible had happened. She had sent the message up the chain immediately, but the response was slow. The Galactic Forum called it an accident, a reactor overload perhaps, or a meteor strike. An unfortunate incident, they called it in their official statement. An unfortunate incident that just happened to wipe out 3 million people in an instant. Leora didn't believe it. Neither did Admiral Juno Rask, the commander of Earth's Defense Union, who arrived at Lunar Command within hours of receiving Leora's report. Rask was not the kind of leader who gave long speeches or held public briefings. She preferred action. She watched the transmission once, then again. On the third viewing, she asked Leora a single question. "Have you seen anything like this before?" "No, ma'am," Leora answered, "but the energy patterns match low-orbit weaponry, planet-level strikes. This wasn't an accident." Rask nodded slowly. "Then we prepare for war." The Admiral didn't wait for the Forum's permission. She knew it wouldn't come. Earth's history was full of long waits and empty promises. This time the decision would be theirs. Within 48 hours the call went out. Protocol Helios was now active. Every ship, every reserve unit, every pilot and engineer still. Breathing was being recalled. Civilian ships were ordered to dock for refitting. Cargo haulers were stripped of crates and loaded with plasma cannons. Mining ships received shield upgrades. It was the largest mobilization since the Mars riots of 2134, and this time, it wasn't about civil unrest, it was about survival. Leora stood in the observation deck of Solaris, watching as dozens of ships filled Earth orbit. Some were sleek and deadly, built for war. Others were barely spaceworthy, patched together from rust and old hopes. Still, each one carried someone ready to fight. She felt both awe and sorrow. Humanity had always been good at building, but now they were building for destruction. Across the stars, in a meeting chamber above the moons of Tessa Prime, the Galactic Forum held emergency talks. One by one, the member species spoke in careful tones. They called for calm, for investigation, for restraint. The Kriari Dominion, a mid-tier power with a known history of territorial aggression, denied any involvement. Their ambassador even suggested the humans were exaggerating. They always speak of tragedy with such noise, the ambassador said, smoothing his scales with a clawed hand. Let us examine the evidence before we jump to accusations. Leora watched the broadcast from her ship, jaw tight. The evidence was a crater the size of a continent. The evidence was ash where people had planted orchards. The evidence was the final expression on Malen Ordis's face, a mix of horror and disbelief. On the fourth day, Admiral Rask summoned a war council. Leora was there, seated beside generals, pilots, and intelligence officers. Rask stood before them, a tablet in one hand and the weight of Earth in the other. The form will stall, she said. They always do. But this wasn't an accident. The scans show precision energy strikes, coordinated, targeted. The colony's defense grid was taken out in under 60 seconds. No rogue comet does that. A murmur passed through the room. We've lost 3 million people. They weren't soldiers. They weren't threatening anyone. They were children, teachers, farmers, and someone burned them. Silence. Then her voice softened. I won't force this choice, but I also won't wait for another colony to vanish before we act. Leora looked around the room. She saw the same resolve in every pair of eyes. The forum had failed. The universe had turned its back, but humanity would not forget. The stars had been silent when Seraphis burned. Now Earth would speak with a voice no one could ignore. The news spread like wildfire. Earth had activated protocol. Helios. For most, those 2 words meant little. But for those who wore a uniform or had once flown a ship under Earth's flag, they meant everything. Protocol Helios wasn't a drill or a routine deployment. It was a full-scale mobilization, the kind the world had only whispered about in war rooms and secret files. It was never supposed to be used. But after Seraphis 9 was turned to dust, there was no other choice. Commander Elias Thorne stood at the edge of Earth's orbital docks, his hands behind his back as he stared at the colossal hull of the Zephyr, Lance. She was old, with the scars of past conflicts still visible along her side, but she had power. A deep, dangerous power. Elias had retired 5 years ago. He had left the service, bought a cabin on Europa's greenbelt, and planned to live out his days watching storms from a quiet porch. But the attack had pulled him back in. Not because he was ordered, but because he couldn't stay away. Elias had once trained half the current fleet captains. He had fought in conflicts that never made the news and negotiated peace where others saw only destruction. Now he was back in uniform, the command codes of the Zephyr Lance stored in the palm of his hand. As he watched fresh crews being loaded into ships around him, he knew this wasn't just a mission, it was a message. Elsewhere in Earth's high command, strategist Sarah Lynn sat alone in a darkened room, eyes glued to a wide screen filled with flashing data. She had been poring over energy readings from Seraphis 9 for hours, comparing them with known weapons patterns from every species in the Galactic Forum database. One sequence finally caught her eye, a distinctive plasma burn buried under layers of interference. It matched a weapon type only one species was known to use, the Kriari Dominion. But something didn't feel right. Sarah had worked in military intelligence long enough to know when something was too clean. The attack on Seraphis was brutally efficient, but the pattern had been disguised. Intentionally. The Kriari might be responsible, but they were hiding it. Or worse, someone wanted them to take the blame. She flagged the data and sent it directly to Admiral Juno Rask with a single line attached. There's more to this. Back in orbit, the Zephyr Lance began its systems check. Dozens of ships joined it. Battle cruisers, retrofitted miners, long-range scouts, even civilian vessels modified for war. It wasn't a polished armada. It was raw, messy, and improvised. But it was also terrifying in its size. Earth had called on every resource and people had answered. Corporations donated security fleets. Colonies sent their planetary guards. Retired soldiers like Elias returned to command chairs. Everyone knew this wasn't about revenge. This was about making sure it didn't happen again. The Galactic Forum sent warnings, of course. Diplomatic messages poured in asking Earth to reconsider its response. The Kriari Dominion formally denied involvement. Their leader, Prime Overseer Vela Karn, appeared on a public broadcast offering condolences for Seraphis 9 while urging restraint. Her words were carefully chosen, but her eyes told another story. She looked nervous. Too nervous for someone who claimed innocence. Admiral Rask reviewed the messages in silence. Her decision had already been made. Earth wasn't waiting, not this time. The Zephyr Lance and its fleet would strike first, not to conquer, but to get answers. The target was a Kriari outpost near the edge of Proxima Sector, one known for military coordination. If anyone had records of ship movements, it would be there. Elias stood on the bridge of the Zephyr Lance, surrounded by a young crew that barely knew each other's names. He addressed them without ceremony. "We're not here to destroy. We're here to make sure what happened on Seraphis never happens again. We don't fire unless they fire first, but we're not backing down." The crew nodded. They were scared, yes, but they were ready. As the fleet formed up, hundreds of ships aligned with precise formation. In the darkness of space, they looked like a swarm of metal stars, glowing with quiet power. A soft hum filled the air as drives powered up. Blue-white energy crackled along the hulls, and one by one, the ships vanished into faster-than-light travel. Their destination, the Kriari border. Back in Lunar Command, Sarah Lynn received a new data packet from a deep space surveillance drone. It wasn't Kriari after all, at least not just them. The energy patterns from the Seraphis attack also matched components from other species' technology. Too many similarities, too many pieces. She stared at the screen and whispered to herself. They didn't act alone. She typed out a second message, fingers moving quickly. Suspected coalition involvement, multiple species, possible cover-up. But the fleet was already gone. The fire had already been lit. As the Zephyr Lance exited light speed near the Kriari outpost, Elias saw the station appear on the main screen. It was larger than expected. Armed, shields active. But there were no warning signals, no hails, no defenses activated. "Commander," his comms officer said quietly. "They're just sitting there." Elias narrowed his eyes. Either they're not ready, or they think we won't do anything. He tapped a button. "Send a signal. We want answers." The silence that followed felt almost familiar. It was the same silence Seraphis had known, but this time humanity wasn't quiet. The Kriari outpost surrendered in less than 10 minutes. No shots fired, no resistance. Commander Elias Thorne stood on the bridge of the Zephyr Lance, watching, as the station's lights powered down one section at a time. It felt too easy. After everything Seraphis 9 had suffered, after the rallying of Earth's forces and the warnings from the Galactic Forum, the first confrontation had ended with a whisper instead of a roar. Elias didn't relax. Easy victories were rarely honest ones. A small team of Marines boarded the outpost and quickly took control. In one of the command chambers, they found something far more valuable than weapons or prisoners. Hidden deep within the system was a locked archive, encrypted in both Kriari and a second unknown language. When the data was transferred to the Zephyr Lance, strategist Sarah Lynn went to work. Her hands moved quickly across her tablet as lines of alien code unfolded. It took her hours to break the encryption, but when she did, what she found was far worse than expected. It wasn't just the Kriari. There were files, meeting logs, communications, proof of a larger alliance. 7 species, each with reasons to fear human expansion, had formed a hidden group called the Umbra Concord. Their goal wasn't open war, it was quiet suppression. Delays, sabotage, manipulation of the Forum, and when necessary, elimination. Seraphis 9 had been a test, not of strength, but of silence. Could humanity be struck down without starting a war? Sarah's voice shook when she reported her findings. To Admiral Rask. They knew, she said, they all knew. They called it a containment strategy. Seraphis was targeted not because it was a threat to security, but to economy, territory, and influence. Rask leaned back in her chair, jaw tight. Do we have proof? Enough to convict a dozen governments, Sarah replied. And one more thing. Seraphis's agricultural data was marked as critical disruption potential. Elias read through the decrypted files that night in his quarters. His eyes landed on a report from one of the Concord members, noting that the crops grown at Seraphis could survive on almost any planetary soil, even without terraforming. If those methods had spread, humanity could have expanded across the stars, faster than any other species. Seraphis wasn't just a colony, it was a revolution in disguise, one that terrified the old powers. The next day, Admiral Rask addressed the fleet. She didn't speak with fire or anger. Her words were simple. We were not attacked out of hatred. We were attacked out of fear. Fear of what humanity can become when we thrive. We are not here to destroy. We are here to ensure that those responsible are held accountable. We fight not for vengeance, but for justice. The fleet moved quickly. In a matter of days, coordinated strikes were launched across multiple systems. Each attack was calculated to disable, not annihilate. Military stations, intelligence centers, and government buildings tied to the Umbra Concord were taken by force. Resistance was weak. Most had not expected a unified Earth response. They had gambled on human hesitation. Instead, they got $700,000, ships, and a people who refused to be erased. In one intercepted message, a Concord general wrote, "We underestimated their resolve. We thought they would retreat behind diplomacy. Instead, they have become the storm." Elias led a mission into the Zoran Drift, where one of the Concord's most influential leaders, Magistrate Hevel Brox, operated a communications hub. Brox tried to negotiate, offering apologies and excuses. "We believed Seraphis posed a destabilizing risk," he said. "It was never personal." Elias stared at him through the screen. 3 million people burned, and you call it strategy. Brox's mouth opened, but no words came. The channel went dark. Back on Earth, public reaction to the truth was explosive. For years, humanity had looked to the Galactic Forum for peace. Now, people saw it as a hollow shell. The Forum had either turned a blind eye or been too weak to stop the Concord. Protests filled Earth cities. Banners reading "Never Again" waved in every colony. The fleet's mission became not only accepted, but demanded. As the campaign stretched into its second week, more secrets came to light. One particular transmission, buried in an old Kriari data node, showed representatives from the Concord laughing as they discussed the Seraphis strike. "By the time Earth notices, it will be dust," said one. Another replied, "And if they respond, the Forum will leash them." That leash had snapped. Elias met with Sarah aboard the Zephyr Lance. "We've come too far to stop now," he said. "Agree," she replied. "But we also have to be careful. Justice can become revenge if we forget why we started this." He nodded. "We remember Seraphis. That's why we keep going. But we don't become what we're fighting." Sarah smiled faintly. "Good, because they're already afraid. Not of what we are, but of what we'll build next." The fleet began preparing for the final phase, targeting the political heart of the Concord. The war was not just about ships and battles anymore. It was about truth, about showing every star system that humanity would not be pushed into the dark. They would not disappear quietly. They would not allow fear to win. In the distance, the stars remained silent, but now they were watching. The fleet arrived in the skies above Varellon Prime, the final stronghold of the Umbra Concord, like a sea of steel and light. Hundreds of human ships took formation in high orbit, engines glowing against the deep violet atmosphere below. Commander Elias Thorne stood at the forward viewport of the Zephyr Lance, arms folded behind his back, watching as the last pieces of the campaign came together. He felt no pride in the destruction they had caused, only clarity. This wasn't conquest. It was the end of a long silence and the beginning of something new. On the ground, Concord leaders scrambled. Their defenses were already weakened from weeks of calculated strikes. The Forum remained frozen in debate, too divided to act, too afraid to admit its failure. Elias had stopped waiting for their permission. Earth had already buried 3 million souls. They weren't going to bury the truth with them. The signal came mid-morning. Virelon's defense grid was dropping. It was their sign of surrender. The capital requested a meeting with Earth's command. Elias and strategist Sarah Lynn landed, hours later with a diplomatic team, walking into a glass-walled chamber where the last Concord representative, Overseer Tevin Kaur, stood alone. He looked tired, his green skin dull, his shoulders heavy. "You've come for revenge," he said quietly. Elias shook his head. "We came for answers." Kaur turned to the large screen behind him and activated a secure file. "You'll find all the names, all the decisions, the truth about Seraphis. It was not just fear. It was envy. Your people did what we could not: grow, adapt, succeed without permission. We saw your progress and chose fear over friendship." Sarah stepped forward. "You thought we'd stay quiet." Kaur looked away. "We thought you'd die quietly." The files were more than confessions. They were blueprints of betrayal, meeting logs, orders, coordinated actions from all 7 Concord members. And worse, a hidden note revealed that elements inside the Galactic Forum had known about the plan before the attack. They hadn't approved it, but they hadn't stopped it either. As the fleet secured the planet, the final message came through, a transmission from an artificial intelligence node deep inside a Drenari archive. It contained a recording of the original Umbra Concord meeting. 7 leaders gathered in shadows. One of them, the Drenari Primarch, leaned forward and spoke, in a calm voice. "Humanity is the variable. They thrive where others fail. They adapt to environments we cannot. If their agricultural techniques are spread, the balance of power shifts. We must act before they take root in every corner of the galaxy." Another responded, "The Forum will ask questions. They will receive answers too late," the Primarch replied. "And by then the colony will be ash." The message ended. The room where Elias and Sarah stood remained silent. No one spoke. The evidence was undeniable. Humanity had been attacked not because of something they did, but because of who they were becoming. 3 weeks later, Earth issued its terms. Every member of the Concord was to stand trial in a neutral sector. Reparations would be paid, not in credits, but in support. New colonies, new trade routes, and open access to agricultural knowledge would be granted to all species, not just humans. The message was clear. This would not become a cycle of destruction. Earth would not build its future on revenge, but on memory. At the site of Seraphis 9, where red dust still blew across empty plains, the ground had changed. Teams had returned, led by survivors' families, scientists, and builders. They constructed a new colony, not a city but a memorial garden. It was planted with the same crops the colony had once developed. This time the soil was mixed with earthstone, granite carved with the names of every person lost in the attack. Commander Elias Thorne knelt at one of the markers, his hand brushing against the engraved surface. "They thought we'd forget," he said softly. Sarah Lynn stood beside him. "But we didn't. And we never will." Admiral Juno Rask, now overseeing the newly formed Guardian fleet, met with leaders from 17 species who had requested alliances with Earth. These were not governments of fear but of hope. They had seen what humanity had endured and how it had responded, not with empire but with unity. They wanted to be part of that strength, a force not built to conquer but to protect. In orbit above Seraphis, the Zephyr Lance drifted alongside other returning ships. Not all had come back. Some had been lost in the first waves, others in the pursuit of justice. But enough remained to remind the galaxy of what humanity could do when tested. As the sun set on the garden below, a soft wind carried the scent of blooming plants, survivors of a lost colony's dream. And above them, in the sky filled with stars, humanity's fleet remained, not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a promise. They didn't start the fire that burned Seraphis 9, but they had ended it. And from its ashes, something stronger had risen. A people who remembered, a people who stood. A people who would never go quietly again.